Now, social media commentator Pieter Kriel is going to be joining us in just a short moment. Pieter Kriel, for context, is a young Afrikaner living in South Africa who in recent weeks has made headlines after posts that he's put up, basically in large part condemning the false pretext that was given for this refugee resettlement of the 49 refugees, white Afrikaners, who arrived in Washington just over 7 days ago now. And we're able to speak, in fact, to Pieter Kriel, who's joining us this evening. Peter, good to have you on the SABC. You say that you've received death threats for calling out the false pretext of this refugee program, yet and still you persist. Why?
I think the reason that I'm receiving death threats from within my own community just shows how necessary this work is. We need to educate people that South Africa has a national crime crisis that affects disadvantaged communities as well as farmers. It's not just an insulated case on farms. It affects everyone, and that is why we need to speak out. And even if safety is sometimes compromised.
And Peter, what do you think? The view that there is this white Afrikaner genocide in South Africa, these fake claims of land seizures, land confiscation, as it's been branded, are so entrenched among some in the Afrikaner community, despite the fact that even when you look at the numbers released by the police service, when you look at the highest murder rates, for example, those police stations, those districts are not where most of these farming areas are.
Yes, well, when we look at what happens in these crime statistics, right, most of these crimes happen in rural areas. It happens in townships. It happens to women and children traveling to and from school. Why we see an influx in the reporting on crime on farms and farm attacks are because we only represent 7% of the population, and that is less on farms. And it does look brutal when these attacks happen on isolated farms, and it gets reported into mainstream media way often than it does in townships, because in townships it just happens so often. Media just cannot report on it as much as it does on farms, because let's be honest, programming and coverage on farms and in these areas are much more than it is in rural township areas.
And one murder is one murder too many in any part of South Africa. Given what you've just said then, why do you think the false claims, the misinformation carries so much and travels so far, so much so that people have applied for refugee status and even gone abroad?
Well, when we look at the type of South Africans, the type of white South Africans that have applied for refugee status and that have actually gone to the United States, in my opinion, it's not the best of South Africans we want to represent us at the World Cup or at a national or international level. It's very desperate people, right? So we need to ask, why is this happening? And we need to have national debates and dialogues and things like that. We don't need to create populist notions and narratives that's going to create even more chaos on a global scale and put South Africa under economic pressure that is going to, in effect, harm the community that is claiming persecution even more than it currently does.
And where do you think this is going to leave race relations in South Africa? Do you think this moment, whatever happens in Washington when the presidents Ramaphosa and Trump meet tomorrow, do you think this moment will leave South Africans black and white more divided than before?
Well, it depends on how President Cyril Ramaphosa decides to handle this. If he's going to sugarcoat it and kiss the feet of Donald Trump, it's going to look very bad on a global scale. He needs to take grip and he needs to lead the South African people. And by doing so, he needs to be honest. He needs to be factual. Yes, we have a crime crisis. It affects farmers. It affects all South Africans. And we need to attack that. We don't need to attack narratives. And I think if he approaches it correctly, it can leave South Africa in a more powerful position than it is now. But when we look at what's happening, we've been more divided. We are more divided than ever because Twitter and social media, people are spreading populist narratives rather than seeking truth. Because truth, this actually puts us in a flight or fight motion because we don't want unfamiliarity, right?
Something else you've said online is that unless the Afrikaner community is evolved and inclusive, it will become irrelevant. What do you mean by that? And what would a more evolved and inclusive Afrikaner community look like? Because like with any other group of people, it is not homogenous.
Yes, well, what I've meant with being inclusive as an Afrikaans people, when we look at what has happened in history, we've had mass segregation, we've had things like apartheid, we've had the world equate being Afrikaans to segregating people, to placing people in homelands and infertile land and so forth. We've created a narrative that people negate to being bad. And what we mean by evolving, what it means to be Afrikaans is evolve the culture, be more inclusive, be factual, don't hold on to nostalgic views of what it meant to be an Afrikaner. It needs to adapt, it needs to hold on to what Nelson Mandela talked about, what it means to have Ubuntu. And running to the US, it doesn't show or reflect that Ubuntu.
And lastly, Peter, I wonder if your message is better or worse received because you're a young Afrikaner yourself, and what the personal cost is. We spoke about death threats earlier, but what has been the personal cost so far, and what do you expect it to be as you continue to spread this message?
Well, of course, obviously, I assume that it will only get worse in the long run. But I don't intend to stop. I intend to build communities, and I don't intend to attract followers. I intend to build thinkers for the next generation, right? I don't want to be a president. I don't want to go into politics, but I want to educate people where education is needed, because in people that have the belief that they are superior cannot be educated, because in order to be educated, you need humility. And that is where we as Afrikaans people, we need to begin, we need to be humble.
You said earlier that you are hoping that when President Cyril Ramaphosa speaks on this issue at the White House with Donald Trump in the next 24 hours or so, you hope he doesn't sugarcoat things. Do you think that the visit, though, will make a difference both on the global stage and here at home, given how far things have gone?
Well, I think at the end of the day, President Cyril Ramaphosa has gone to the United States. He can present it in a factual manner to present to other global nations, whether or not the Republican Party and Donald Trump and Elon Musk accepts that. That is going to be their choice, right? And whether they accept it or not, that will reflect to other world leaders. The only thing Cyril Ramaphosa and our president can do is be honest, and in doing so, he can be a good, example to not just South Africans, but to the world. If Donald Trump and his cabinet and so forth don't accept it, that will reflect on them.
Social media commentator Pieter Kriel, good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time on The Full View.